present myself, my name is Ioan Iacob. I'm a security researcher at CrowdStrike for quite some years now, and I have 9 years of experience in the domain. My colleague will assist me. His name is Madalin Ionita. He also works for CrowdStrike and has more than 6 years experience in reverse engineering malware. So this is the agenda of today. We're going to talk a bit about various techniques that wipers have used in the past 10 years. I think you already know about the context from this spring. Ukraine hasn't been only attacked on the battlefield, but also in the cybersecurity space, and it has seen 5 or 6 wiper families trying to sabotage their operations. So to give you some background first, what wipers do is they're mainly used to sabotage, as previously mentioned. Their only purpose in life is to destroy data beyond recoverability. And they can also, they can target both files and the drive itself, so depending on the type of wiper you're dealing with, you might see either files or the entire drive being wiped. There are some shared traits between wipers and ransomware, so they pretty much have the same anatomy, I would say. The biggest difference is that ransomware needs to somehow make data recoverable, and wipers do not need to do that extra step. Over the 20 or so wiper families that we analyzed, we found that there are quite a lot of techniques, so we'll try and dive into some of them. And each technique comes with its own set of advantages and disadvantages, either speed or recoverability for the victim. To give you some history, we started analyzing wipers from back in 2012 with Aramco and Rasgas being targeted by Shamoon, and all of the following years have various types of wipers being targeting various companies, and this year in Ukraine we've seen 6 or so malware families, wiper families targeting Ukraine alone. So that's why we got interested in doing a presentation on this. Our goals for today's talk is to identify the most common techniques used by wipers, talk a bit about some of them, do a deep dive, identify the most common ones, and see their benefits and disadvantages. So I'm going to start with some main techniques that all of, or the majority of wipers have. We'll have file discovery, file overwrite, how they destruct the drive, or destroy the drive, and we also see that these wipers differ in the data that is overwritten on top of the target files. Already mentioned that wipers have some traits with ransomware. Some wipers are just darn simple. The only thing that they do is they delete files. Others go even into the kernel and try to delete raw sectors from the kernel space, which is something user mode cannot do. But let's dive into the technical part. I'm going to start with file discovery. This is a technique that is seen in most of the wiper families out there. It would need to iterate over the entire file system in order to find the targets, the target files, and the target drives that it needs to wipe. And to do so, the most often seen APIs are find first file and find next file within a recursive function. The majority of wipers will immediately wipe the file when it reaches it, but a few, like Apostle 00/SQL shred, will queue them to be wiped after the iteration process has finished, which might buy some time for the victim to start the wiping process. To overwrite the files, The most often seen technique is just plain old write file API. Of course, in order to write to a file, you need a handle to a file, so you would use create file for that. Some wipers differ in the amount of data that is overwritten to the file. Some overwrite the entire length of the file. Others just try to increase speed of operation by overwriting the first X bytes from that file, which might leave room for recovery. Some wiper families like 00 go a step further and use Octals against files in order to wipe the files. Madalin will talk a bit more about what an Octal is. I'm just going to do a brief presentation of one. This one, 00 uses NTFS control file API and sends the set0 data Ioctal to the file system, and this way the entire length of the file will be overwritten with zeros. You can see a code snippet on the left if you want to have a better look. All of the slides, of course, will be available after the presentation. Other families use simple file deletion using delete file. Where the NIPT, Olympic Wiper, and Apostle implement this technique. You can see over here on your left, one good example is they open the file, they read, they grab the size of that file, they overwrite the entire file with bogus data, and at the end they will delete it. Another target is, so we've talked previously about files, but another target for wipers would be the drive itself. So why not just, why delete all of the files when you can just stop the operation of your target just by deleting the master boot records. In order to do so, Caddy Wiper uses another Ioctal, the disk set drive layout Ioctal, and this one is used to wipe out the MBR of the machine. We've seen also some differences in the contents that are overwritten over files. Most of the samples, like Caddy Wiper, 00 kill disk, etc., will overwrite the files with zeros, because this might leave some opportunity for recovery methods like magnetic force microscopy, which is something that we're not going to dive into right now. Other wipers decided to, let's implement random data. So they generate a random buffer. This buffer, of course, when it's generated, it takes some time, so it takes some computational power, so the operation will take more time. But this is the preferred technique by some wipers in order to minimize that generation time of random data. In the case of, what malware was this one? Discover, you would see that it uses malloc, which allocates a piece of memory but doesn't initiate that memory with zeros, so you would have garbage data in that memory. So that garbage data is overwritten over the target file, which is a nice way of generating random data. In order to surpass that potential drawback, other wiper families have hard-coded contents that will be overwritten to the files. In the case of Shamoon, for example, they have a JPEG image that is overwritten over these files. You can see here in the memory of this debugger the JPEG header. I won't show you the image, it's pretty ugly. And in the case of Israbai, they were overwriting with a xenophobic message the contents of the file. Israbai was targeting Israel. I think you can guess by the name. So that is for the first part. I'm going to hand it over to Madalin. Please take it over.
Hello. So in this part, I will talk about Octals and how they are used in the samples that we've analyzed. First of all, Octals are a method of communicating between a user mode process and a kernel mode device. They are sent via a device I/O control API, and they are used by developers in order to gain extra functionalities from the operating system, other than the well-known create, open, read, write Windows API that are available. Wipers use Octals in order to gain extra functionality as well, and we will going to see some examples in the following slides. When it comes to acquiring information, the RISE layer uses these three Octals that are on the slides in order to get information about device type, partition number, and to find the location of the master file table and master boot record in order to send them to the wiper routine. Before starting to overwrite the disk itself, first the RISE layer will use fsctl lock volume in order to lock the volume. Then it will start the wiping routine, and after that it will dismount or unmount it using fsctl dismount volume ioctal. This procedure is run for every drive letter that is available on the operating system. A similar approach was seen in Petya and Stone Drill as well. An interesting use case is made by SQL Shred, which uses ioctal disk delete drive layout, which basically deletes the boot record from the master boot record and thus schedules the drive for formatting starting from offset 0 to the end of the disk. This is a quick and easy way of deleting the drive rather easily. Drive layer takes it a bit further and uses fsctl get volume bitmap in order to get a bitmap data structure. A bitmap data structure is each bit in it represents a cluster in the disk with a positive value, meaning that that cluster is occupied. Drive layer targets only the occupied clusters. Of course, this is a snapshot in time, so there might be clusters that aren't deleted when the wiping routine starts. When it comes to files, Drive layer uses fsctl get retrieval pointers in order to get the virtual clusters that are allocated for a file, and fsctl move file in order to scramble the clusters. So this way it will make the data fragmented across the disk, and thus it will make recovery even harder. SQL Shred, on the other hand, has a different approach in which it constructs a custom data structure, similar to an array, in which it will store the file paths that are going to be deleted, and together with some extra data. In this case, it will use fsctl get reparse point ioctal in order to get additional information about the file or the directory. In the snippet, the check is made to see if the file is a symlink or the directory is a mount point. We've compiled a table of ioctals and together with their wiper variants that use them. This can be seen in the slides or on the blog post that we've posted. Johnny?
Thank you. So I'm going to continue with the third part of today. So now we're going to talk about kernel mode and drivers. And we've seen two drivers used by these wipers. One is called error disk, and the other one I think is called endpoint mount driver or something like that. So, as you might already know, user mode is heavily guarded by various security tools and even by the OS itself. So you have some constraints. You cannot do all of the fancy stuff from user mode. And if you want to do something more advanced and delete files that are protected by the operating system, like virtual shadow copies, maybe you should you should plant a driver inside the kernel space, and you can do from there anything that you want. It sounds easy in theory, but it's not that easy to develop a kernel driver. The smallest of bugs can crash the entire operating system if it's left untreated. This requires a lot of resources, programming power, and also money. On top of that, Microsoft has to sign your driver, which in theory shouldn't be easy for you to be able to get your malicious driver to be signed by Microsoft. So why go through all of the hassle of using these custom-built drivers and spend time on doing that when you could use legitimate drivers from third-party entities and use that driver to achieve your malicious goals? So this is exactly what these wipers have done. They copied drivers from third-party vendors within their own wiper. They installed that, and they proxy all of the communication with the file system through that driver. So the operating system will not know that the request is coming from user mode. It will see that the file system itself is manipulated by a driver. So this way, the operating system, the wiper can delete shadow copies, master file tables, even raw clusters or raw sectors on disk, or other protected files that might not be reachable from user space. The first driver I'm going to talk about is LROT disk. It's a legitimate driver used by developed by the LDOS company. It was used by Distover, ZeroClear, Dustman, and Shamoon. All of the activity to the file system was proxied through this driver, and they could achieve deletion of VSS copies, for example. There was an interesting caveat with ZeroClear and Dustman. They were using an on-site version of LROT disk. They had some additional features, but it wasn't signed. So in order to get that driver to execute in the kernel space, they had to use a module called TDL. I think it's Turla driver loader. And what they have done is they installed a legitimate vulnerable driver from VirtualBox. They exploited that driver to disable driver signature enforcement, and then they could load their unsigned malicious driver into the kernel space. So yeah, that's a thing. When you have a driver installed in the kernel space, now you can interact with it the same as you do with the file. You need to grab a handle to it. You can see over here a screenshot with create file to the LROT disk device, and then you can talk to it as you would, or manipulate it as you would with a regular file in the operating system. So no fancy, I don't know, programming skills are required. So Shamoon uses this driver to retrieve various information. It can retrieve pointer data from the file system itself and decide what sectors it can use to overwrite. In order to do so, it will send a get retrieval pointers Ioctal. It will send a get retrieval pointer Ioctal via the device IO control API. We can see an example of how Shamoon is overwriting these sectors. In the second screenshot, you see that it's opening a handle to the device, and then uses set file pointer and write file to iterate over the raw sectors from the disk, and it will wipe them with zeros. Set file pointer is just basically setting a cursor in an array. The other driver I'm going to talk about is endpoint mount driver. This one was developed by ESUS, or ESUS, I know how it's pronounced. It was used for their partition, it is used for their partition manager utility. So it's pretty similar to the previous one in capabilities. And it has been seen used by DriveSlayer in March of 2022, targeting Ukraine. This was kept inside of LZA compressed resource inside the PE binary itself. I'm going to go a little bit on how the driver actually works under the hood. We can see here the main function of the driver. What the driver needs to do is create a device, and it also needs to create a symbolic link. When you want to talk to the driver, you need to grab a handle to that symbolic link. And after that, it initiates some major functions within an array, and every time you call, let's say, create file, it will call the create major function. When you call write file, the operating system will know that it will call the write major function. So one example here, we have the create file major function. We can see that it's basically grabbing a handle to the original driver that is responsible for talking to the disk, and the other write file or device IO control API will just proxy all of the requests to the appropriate file system driver. In order to work with this drive, you don't have to do fancy operations. You just need to grab a handle to the driver, to the device itself, set file pointer to point exact on the disk where you want to write, and then you use write file in order to overwrite the disk. So there's not that big of a programming problem, in my opinion. So yeah, drivers are a thing, and I'm going to leave the last techniques to Madalin.
On the last part, I'm going to talk about the miscellaneous techniques that we've seen across the wiper samples. And some of them are common to wipers only. Others are common with RAMs and are ransomware specific. We're going to take a few examples because time is short. It's pretty short. When it comes to volume shadow copies deletion, we've only seen one sample, namely Meteor, who deletes the snapshots either via Windows Management Instrumentation command line utility or using the standard VSS admin tool. Unlike Meteor, DriveSlayer disables the VSS service, as we can see in the snapshot, but does not attempt to delete them. There is an important footnote here. Wipers that use third-party drivers, like the one presented in the previous part, does not need to delete the snapshots as they can remove everything. Isaac Wiper has an interesting approach in which creates a thread for each partition and reads the partition available space, creates a file, and starts writing to that file. This will basically overwrite all the free space in the partition, making data recoverability harder because having junk space in the unused pages can make an incident responder's life harder. Some wipers do not use the standard Windows API like delete file and use the default Windows script bat files, and for example they only execute the commands that are seen on the slide. The final nail in the coffin, so to speak, it's rebooting the operating system after the wiping routine has finished. Most of the wipers use the standard Windows API exit Windows X, which will just reboot the operating system depending on the flags, or just shut it down. PETIA calls anti-race hard error, which will trigger a blue screen, and drives layer will call initiate system shutdown X API with different flags. After the reboot or the shutdown, the operating system isn't bootable anymore, so you know you have a problem. An interesting approach is seen in 00. It is the only wiper variant that takes time to walk the registry hive and delete each and every key with either 0 if it's an integer or with an empty string if it's a string. And as it goes up, it will delete the registry tree as well. On the impact part, which is the last part, I will let Johnny take the lead again.
So this is the last part of our presentation. We analyzed the wiper families that we've seen in the wild from the past 10 years, and the majority of them were this year alone in 2022, and we have seen that they didn't necessarily increase in complexity. They tend to share features from other wipers that were seen back in the day. They also share some features with ransomware. Yeah. I'm going to try and speed it up. So each technique has its own advantages and disadvantages. So developers might need to make some trade-offs, either increase the speed of the operation or risk that the effectiveness of the wiping routine isn't good enough, and victims may have the opportunity to recover the data. These are all of the techniques that you can see over here associated with all of the malware families. Again, you'll have access to the slides. There's no big need to take pictures. And of course, all of this effort was done in order for us to gain detection on wiper families. I think we got time for 3 questions, let's say.
Yeah, well, let's hear out from the audience first. If you have questions, please let us know. Our colleagues over here, Madalin and Dan, will share a mic with you. And we also have prizes for the people that have questions. Well, we're going to share hats and T-shirts, and CrowdStrike specifically has prizes for the people interested in this. Well, let me get you the mic.
Thank you. This was a great presentation. One question popped into my mind when you showed that real legit drivers are used in the attacks by the malware. Are the companies behind the drivers doing anything about it? Like, I know that NVIDIA has drivers for its GPU, but what can you do if you hack a GPU?
I don't know if there's much room for opportunity over them from their side. One of the drivers requires that you send a serial key when you try to open a handle to it. So unless you have that serial key, it shouldn't allow you to grab a handle to it. But you can easily grab the serial key and replicate it, because wipers that we showed previously had that serial key in it. So I don't know if they can do much. I'm pretty sure they are aware of that. Maybe that's a topic of research. I don't know. Or maybe that's something that Microsoft can help us with.
Great. We have also another question here.
Hey guys, thank you for the presentation. So you mentioned something about disabling the driver verification or the driver. Do you need like a system privileges or to run in kernel mode to be able to achieve that?
Yeah, you need administrative privileges in order to do so.
Okay, and the malware cannot do it easily, I mean, without kernel level?
So in order to load the driver, you need administrative privileges for the user more process. We had a question over there. I think that was the first one.
Sorry about that.
So you need administrative privileges for that. And you can then install the driver. After you have the driver installed and up and running, it has unlimited power. You're in God mode in the operating system, and you can do everything you want. And I think Yeah. Have I answered your question? Okay.
Hi, I had a question. Is there the possibility, for example, if an attacker gets in the network and reaches the machine that writes data on tapes, can he use a wiper to delete the tapes? Of course, we're not talking about worm tapes, which we can read you can write once and read many, but the regular ones, which can be rewritten. And if we know if there is a possibility to recover the data after it was deleted.
I don't have a lot of experience with actual tapes, but there is a driver that is used to write to those tapes. You don't need to know the exact protocol. You just need to attach to the driver that is responsible to write into the tape. So that's not something difficult. I think these wipers will work as is on any backup system that has tape. So that shouldn't be an issue. Recovery-wise, no idea what can be done on tapes. In theory, everything is possible, but in practice, that's not that easy.
Hi. A question?
Except third-party drivers that makes use of the kernel, I saw in the presentation that wipers.
Yeah, so the question was that if we analyze wipers on other operating systems, we mainly focused on Windows. The two of us focused on Windows, and we didn't look at other wiper families. But I think Ukraine had a variant targeting Linux operating system as well. So yeah, Linux has malware. And Mac as well.
Cheers, guys. Quick question from my side. Out of the samples that you normally analyze, here, how many of them, or rather how many wipers are actually disguised as ransomware?
I think you can answer.
Petya is it started as a ransomware and it became a wiper because the encryption key was randomly generated and it wasn't a possibility to retrieve that key. But we've seen some examples in which wipers moved to ransomware and ransomware moved to wipers as well. But we can have another series of questions at the stand booth at CrowdStrike.